I'm very glad that you're here. The Kreminar is supported by the AIHP, which is the American Institute for the History of Pharmacy, the School of Pharmacy here at UW, as well as the Erdang Lab, which is the lab that I run, a historical and social sciences lab. The title of today's talk is highlighting our home base, stories from the AIHP UW SOP historical collections. And we're going to be focusing on our collections here. And I'm actually really excited to talk to you about the strength of our collections in the late 19th century and the 20th century, the different types of documents and objects that we have, that cover the pharmaceutical trade, drug manufacturing, as well as retail pharmacy, community pharmacy, and chain store pharmacy, all the way up to the present. Many libraries and many archives, repositories have worked to collect areas, snippets, if you will, of this type of history, but the American Institute of the History of Pharmacy, which I'll say a bit more about in a second, has made it its mission to collect in this area. The Kreminar this month, which is happening every Thursday at noon, is focused on our collections, and I'm really sort of excited to sort of set the groundwork for future talks, which will be far superior than this one. The other talks that are forthcoming will be much more research oriented and are going to be really sort of digging into the wonderful pieces that we've got in our collections. My job today is to sort of set the stage and to tell you about some of the initiatives that are ongoing within our world-leading collections here at AIHP and within the School of Pharmacy. And what I'd like to do, first of all, is just point you towards other educational materials. If you are a pharmacist, whether or not you're practicing or whether or not you're teaching other pharmacists, maybe you're in history or the social sciences, the Erdang Lab, in conjunction with UW SOP and AIHP, have really strived to create public-facing educational materials. And so I want to point you towards the AIHP YouTube page, where you can see interviews with figures from the world of pharmacy that you may want to use in the classroom, or history-related research papers that have been given having to do with psychedelics, having to do with other controlled substances. And I'd love to hear from you in the future about what sort of Kreminars you'd like. I'm going to start with a question for you today, and that is, with respect to the AIHP collections, how did it all start? And then where are we going? First of all, how did it all start? Well, it started with Edward Kremers. He's the founder of a unique tradition in pharmacy, one that blends the social sciences, humanities with the health sciences and pharmacy education. Kremers was the second director of what we now call the UW-Madison School of Pharmacy. He was trained as a chemist. He was also a trained pharmacist. He did basic research on plant chemistry, and he was recognized as an expert on the chemistry of volatile oils. But beyond his own research program and beyond his own administration as the dean of the School of Pharmacy, he was also extremely interested in interdisciplinarity and focused heavily on innovating pharmacy curricula across the country. He was one of the leaders in the movement to offer a four-year college degree with respect to pharmacy, and he helped establish a 4-year course in pharmacy at the UW-Madison School of Pharmacy in 1882. He pushed for scientific pharmaceutical curriculum on the one hand, but then he also pushed heavily for blending different types of disciplines and methodologies together to provide pharmacists with the absolute best training that they would get, that they ought to be offered in his view. And that's what made UW-Madison stand apart from other pharmacy schools across the country. But the reason we're here today is because he also started collecting heavily in the history of pharmacy, in the history of pharmaceuticals. And this is in the 1880s, 1890s. And that sort of initiative of collecting materials, not just from the US, but from around the world, laid the foundation for our collections today. And then secondly, how did it all start with collections? We have to refer to George Erdong. And there he is beside some of our excellent books. George Erdong moved to Madison in 1939, fleeing Nazi Germany, and then became highly influential in establishing the International Society for the History of Pharmacy as a trained pharmacist himself and a historian. In 1941, along with Kremers, he helped establish the American Institute for the History of Pharmacy within the school. And I just wanted to basically underline some of their credo, some of the key points that they articulated back in 1941 when they created the AIHP. And when I say they, I mean Kremers, Erdong, but other faculty members within the School of Pharmacy and former deans. So what did they actually care about back then? Well, they cared about cataloging, inventorying material that they collected. So what was super important for Kremers and the others at the AIHP was to collect, select, arrange, exhibit pharmaceutical historical material. They also felt it was incredibly important to give the research worker in the field of history, but also in pharmacy mind, as well as other basic sciences, the possibility to discuss projects, to get advice on literature. And that stayed the same today with the Institute. They also thought it was important to furnish information, as well as help other colleges of pharmacy around the country. This is something that the AIHP is committed to today. They wanted to furnish material for popular pharmaceutical historical information going to the wider audiences. So this is really the Wisconsin idea in action. So how could you best communicate information around the history of pharmacy and pharmaceuticals? Well, as they put it in 1941, journals and newspapers. Obviously, nowadays, we can do it at other venues, social media, whether or not it's Twitter, whether or not it's Instagram, uh, even TikTok. There are others that I don't even know about. But the point is that how do we furnish material to the public, essentially? And then finally, what was very important in the establishment of the Institute was to cooperate with historians, cooperate with related sciences, um, especially in medicine and within the growing medical school here on the campus. to promote mutual scientific, professional, and social understanding and progress derived from such a cooperation. Okay, so when you distill that down and you think about how that applies today, what it essentially uh, means is there are a couple of buckets, three buckets to be precise, that we've focused on. One has to do with collections, one has to do with outreach and programming, and then the third has to do with publications. This is the best way of organizing those tenets that were first articulated back in 1941. Now, with collections, takes us to the second part of this question that I asked. So it all started with Kremers and Erdong. They sort of came up with this idea we should start collecting. They started framing what the collections ultimately meant, how it ought to be communicated. And so it sort of raises this point about where are we going now, all these years later. And that's the focus of the rest of this talk. And I just wanted to uh, give you an extra bit of background about my own thinking on the collections. I am the current historical director of the AIHP. One of the things that has been driving um, my own thought processes and my own mental models is how do we use these collections to galvanize what our AIHP president refers to as progress. So our president is John Grabenstein. He recently won the Remington Medal in the history, or in pharmacy, I should say. And one of the things that he likes to say often is history informs progress. Now, that's all well and good, but you have to have an excellent handle on the collections to be able to inform progress, if you will. One of the things that uh, that has sort of helped me conceptualize actions around our collections is a conference I attended back in 2015, 2016. And this conference was held in London at the University of London. It was called Radical Collections, Re-examining the Roots of Collections, Practices, and Information Professions. There were a variety of different individuals that attended besides myself. One was Alicia Selly, um, and she had been working with the Wisconsin Historical Society, and she had been thinking through um, what are the appropriate areas to be focusing on as an archivist? What are the appropriate areas to be thinking about collecting in the future? Because the nature of the collections, you have to put real thought and effort into the areas that you want to keep collecting. And Alicia Selly, in her talk, which was called Beyond the Left, documenting American racism in print periodicals at the Wisconsin Historical Society and theorizing radical collections today, got my wheels turning back then about what kind of resources, what kind of initiatives would be required if ever I was to be leading collections, acting as a historical director at a place like the AIHP. I gave a talk on mind meddling, exploring drugs and radical psychiatry in archives. Um, this particular book is freely available. It's open access. If you have any interest in information sciences or in collections, you can just you can go and download it at your leisure. So that's a bit of a background about where the collection started from, what's going on with my own mental models. And so now what I'm going to do is turn towards what is actually happening right now with the collections, what's happening at our home base. and what it might mean for the future. So I'm going to start with a large federally funded grant that was awarded to the Erdang Lab, and which supports the AIHP UW SOP collections. The National Endowment for the Humanities, which we are very lucky to have in the United States, supported a grant called the Accessing the History of Health, Pharmacy, and Medicines, a UW SOP AIHP grant. So they supported a project to the tune of $330,000, and the grant, which was awarded, um, really has as its major goal to improve the description, to improve the accessibility of our collections. We've got these fantastic materials right on our doorstep. But what has happened since Kreminar started collecting is it's grown and it's grown and it's grown. And what we don't have just yet is intellectual control, so to speak, over this collection. And so the NEH saw the value in supporting um, this particular project because of the way that it might shed light uh, on uh, on the current moment, on how pharmacy has evolved over time. It might shed light on COVID responses, on the opioid crisis, on really troubling health-related problems that the country is facing. We can learn from the past, but the best way to learn, and the only way to learn from the past, is if we have a really well-organized set of collections. So I won't bore you with the deliverables of the project, but what we absolutely have to do is essentially go back to what Kremers and Erdang articulated in 1941, and that's arrange, catalog, inventory, the different items that we have within our collections, and then make them available to the wider public. And that's precisely what this NEH grant aims to do. Uh, I have to absolutely highlight some of the response that this has gotten in the media. So the NEH grant allowed for the hiring of an archivist here in the School of Pharmacy. That's Hannah Rose Swan. She's been in the SOP now for nearly a year, and she's been doing excellent work. That you can see Erdang behind her. And the Cap Times came to the School of Pharmacy and featured her recently in May 7th, 2023, talking about some of the work that she's been doing. If you're interested, you can easily Google this particular article in the Cap Times. I will also maybe just put this in the chat if you're interested in reading this. It does, I think, a really lovely job in telling the story of some of our collections, but also telling the story of all the work that's involved. So this is a really, really important project that's ongoing in the School of Pharmacy that has links to the past and might inform progress in the future. The next initiative and project that I wanted to underline for you is a relationship between the AIHP and the University of Wisconsin Digital Collections Center. So uh, being at a really outstanding university, we have resources and capacity for digitization and for enabling uh, accessibility to certain parts of our collection. And so, along with AIHP staff in 2020, 2021, we reached out to UW-DCC and asked whether or not if there was interest in showcasing some of the history of pharmacy. And the response was absolutely. This is extremely important for not only our community, but for the wider Wisconsin and beyond. And so, I'd encourage you to go to UW-DCC and look up the American Institute of the History of Pharmacy collection. It's fascinating, it's fun, and again, this could be very useful for you teaching. And please, by all means, recommend it to others as much as possible. The idea behind this particular initiative with UW-DCC was to get visual. So just to give you a sense, we have 17,000 photographs within our collection that came from the Drug Topics magazine. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. And these images had been donated to the School of Pharmacy and to the AIHP. We thought it would be brilliant if we could make some of these photographs that encompass the various parts of pharmacy available to outsiders. Instead of having to come into the collection, we could digitize it and make it available to others. And then besides that, we also wanted to digitize some of our trade catalogs. So for those of you who don't know this, we have one of the absolute best collections of trade catalogs in the entire world. And trade catalogs are so important for a few different reasons. They help tell the story around manufacturing. They help tell the story around pricing. They help tell the story around advertising. They come right from the source. They come right from given companies. And so these catalogs are sort of really rich sources to help understand the medical marketplace and wider society in the 19th century. And the fact that we have these catalogs and have such an amazing set of them, we really wanted to make sure that people had access to these sources as well. And so UW-DCC, again, saw value in making these available in digitizing this and doing the hard work of digitizing this. So I'm going to talk about one more initiative, and this initiative has to do with support from the university. It's the Library Collections Enhancement Initiative. And this is something that was initiated by the Office of the Vice Chancellor, Research Graduate Education here on campus. It was a pilot program, and we've been awarded grants both in phase 1 and phase 2 to enhance our different sources and collections. And the first pot of money that we were awarded was for a project called Before Big Pharma, enhancing this trade catalog, a set of trade catalogs that I already referred to. And so we were given resources to go out and purchase more of these trade catalogs, and that it is real boon. It's a real strength of the university it supports this type of this project, uh, because we get to learn about so much about pharmacy space, whether or not it's paints or the chemical products or the toiletries or commercial goods, whether or not it's about the different products that pharmacists wanted to buy and put in their stores at the turn of the century as the 1800s were becoming the 1900s. And there's wide applicability as well. So really have to thank the this particular university program. And then, like I said, we were given funds in phase 2 as well as phase 1. Phase 2 um, uh, had to do with strengthening psychedelic collections on within our what we've got so far. And we titled it From Classic to Underrepresented Resources. So what does that mean? It means that what we wanted to do with funds was make sure that we had sort of the foundational texts that every university should have, as well as buy certain texts that were slightly rare and help tell different stories around psychoactivity, psychedelics. Now, the reason that I put forward this bid was because of the ways in which the School of Pharmacy now, as well as in the past, has uh, core strengths in the mechanisms, actions, delivery of certain psychoactive serotonergic substances. So we now have a master's program, the Psychoactive Pharmaceutical Investigation Program, as well as the Applied Drug Development Program. We also, within the School of Pharmacy, have a center called the Transdisciplinary Center for Research in Psychoactive Substances, and that's a university-wide center. And so it was really a no-brainer, really, really fundamental to have social science, humanities, written materials that students, either in the PPI program or associated with the center, had access to. So to get those materials into their hands if they needed it. So with this phase 2 grant from the university, we were able to purchase, I think off the top of my head, it's 70 odd texts that we didn't have on campus and that we now have within the School of Pharmacy and within the AIHP offices. So those are the sort of areas that I wanted to talk a little bit about. So this helps give you a sense of where we're going after I've talked about where it all started. And it's so vitally important from my own perspective that we are doing justice to what Kremers and Erdong articulated back in 1941, and even earlier, doing justice to the collections that Kremers started in the 1890s. We really, really want to get a handle on the collections. We really want to have researchers using the collections, researchers of all stripes, of course, not just from the humanities and social sciences, but also from the health sciences. And we want to make sure that people here and then others know that they can access these sources remotely, that you can find the sources if you need them, but then you can also access them from a distance. You don't have to be physically on site to really get a taste of the history of pharmacy and pharmaceuticals. So what I'll say next then is a little bit more along the lines of cheerleading than anything else. Uh, but I think the road to tomorrow is pretty bright at this stage. This image comes from uh, an advertisement I pulled from American Druggist from 1954, uh, and a frank talk on the future of pharmacy. Um, uh, was really about where where pharmacy was going in the 1950s, and I thought it was just really appropriate to put before you as we think about where the history of pharmacy is going in the future. It's really going to succeed or fail on our ability to really garner collections, make those collections um, usable for people. I think that's so vital. Then the next thing that I'll say, again, there's a bright future ahead for you folks in particular, because this talk is coming to an end, and there's a bright future ahead for you because you can look forward to other excellent talks in this Kreminar series in the future. The future talks are going to be far more research oriented. This talk was more of an introductory primer to give you a sense of why we're doing this, what we have available, and why this matters. Next week, we have a talk from Gabriel Lake Carter, as well as myself, and the title is "What is the Soft Drug Problem? Gatekeeping, Pharmacist Authority, and the Pharmaceutical Industry, 1950 to 1975." And this talk is going to present archival documents from this time period, 50 to 1975, in the US mainly. We're going to focus on a collection of pharmacy posters that were developed by Frank Pinchak, who was a pharmacist, but also um, uh, who majored in marketing. And we're going to show documents from the American Pharmaceutical Association regarding the 1962 Remington Medal that was given to Harry Anslinger. We're going to use these primary documents from our collections to help talk about the evolving role of the pharmacist in the post-war period, um, especially as it relates to authority with prescriptions, perceptions around controlled substances, and gatekeeping efforts that pharmacists had as part of the pharmaceutical industry. We'll also talk about the marketing of drugs that cross the medicinal and personal use contexts. And so I'm looking forward to reconnecting with you about this subject next week. After that, we have talks being given by J.J. Strange from the history department, and then talks from Hannah Rose Swan, who is the archivist here in the School of Pharmacy. We have Come On In, The Water's Fine, A Brief History of Healing Springs and Medical Tourism. This particular talk given by Hannah Swan is about geothermal baths and healing springs, the ways in which these different types of baths and springs intersect with pharmacy and health practices, not just in the past, but also in the present moment. She's going to flag up some, I think, pretty cool documents that we have in our collections. And then I'll just say a brief word about JJ's talk. which is called Stories of Chinese Students in the AIHP, and the UW-SOP, A Tale of Success and Exchange. If you're interested, you can get a primer on this talk in the School of Pharmacy by looking at one of the display cases and exhibits that we have on the first floor across from the dean's office. And that really, I think, highlights some of the diversity uh, in our collections, and also highlights the need perhaps for more diversity in the collections that we have here. So I wanted to be brief with this talk today. As I said, this was mostly an introduction and a primer for our future Kreminars. I really want to thank you for taking part in the Kreminars. I want to thank you for taking part in the intellectual life of the IHP and the UW-SOP, which, as I've already mentioned several times, has a long tradition of blending different types of disciplines together and building that into our research capacity, but also into our curriculum. I also want to encourage you and thank you for perhaps joining the AIHP. And if not joining the AIHP, then perhaps sharing the opportunity and the resources that we're creating with other pharmacists, others in the health sciences, or just your friends and family. So that's the end of the sort of didactic portion. If there are questions, ideas, we can certainly open the floor for those. And we'll just take a couple minutes for you to gather any thoughts if you have any. And again, if you have questions, you can raise your hand or put them in the chat.